This will be a retelling of the memoir called The Life, Crimes, and Confessions of Clifton Branham. We have a lot of information concerning Clifton Branham's life according to the newspaper articles of the time in our Killing Rock series. Both of the links of the article and video are available in the description box below. We are able to retell this story because it was written before September 25, 1903 by Clifton Branham and printed just after his death. As with all memoirs and autobiographies, please take them with a huge grain of salt, as no one wants to think of themselves as a villain or antihero in their own stories. We wish to thank the creators of Potter's website, which is linked down below under Yapot. Thank you for your tireless work in keeping our history alive. We also wish to thank Steve Fleming for talking to us about Clifton and sharing information between us. It is people like you that we learn a great deal from. We will use the pictures of the places that these events took place in if we do not have pictures of the people available. The picture that we have of Clifton Branham is from the Find a Grave website. It was a contribution of Steve Fleming. Another piece of housekeeping. What is known today as Pine Mountain was called Cumberland Mountain at that time. It would be renamed at a later time in history. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Clifton's information. Clifton Branham was born in 1861 in Cabin Branch in Letcher County, Kentucky. His parents were John C. Branham and Mahalia Mosley. He had several siblings: Elizabeth Branham Mullet, 1843 to 1916, Joseph Branham, 1845 to 1934, Richard Branham, 1847 to 1932, Charity Branham Moore, 1847 to 1929, Adeline Branham Cox, 1853 to unknown, Millie Branham Cox, 1860 to 1949, Polly Branham Johnson, 1866 to 1953. There is historically one other sibling, Tandy Branham, listed with Clifton, but he could have been a half-sibling or not recorded in some sources. He also has an uncle named Tandy Branham, and the two are not to be confused. Branham would marry his cousin, Nancy J., against her mother's wishes on May 23, 1880, in Wise, Virginia. Nancy was born November 15, 1861, in Pound, Virginia. Clifton states that they were only 1 month apart in age, but we still don't have a date of birth for him. They would have 3 children together: Ida Branham Taylor, 1881 through 1974, Judge W. Branham, 1884 to 1865, and Elizabeth Branham Warwick, 1886 to 1925. Meenma would be born to the marriage but would die at the age of 3. Ida would marry David Fleming. George would marry Maggie Vanover. Branham would become the last man hanged in Wise County, Virginia on September 25, 1903, in the murder of his wife, Nancy. This writing comes from the time that Clifton was awaiting his execution at the Wise County Jail in Virginia. Now, for the writings of Clifton Branham. The early years. Clifton begins his writing by speaking about how he was born in 1861 on Cabin Branch in Letcher County. His father was a farmer by trade. Both parents were members of the local Baptist church. His family moved to Dorton Creek in Pike County, Kentucky, the year that the Civil War had broken out. They continued to live there during the war years, and Branham speaks about seeing soldiers moving through the mountains. 2 of Clifton's brothers and father, John, fought during the war. His father was captured and taken to Camp Chase and did not return until after the war was finished. By that time, Mahalia had taken her children to north of Cumberland Mountain, near Elkhorn Creek, to live. Mahalia had a hard time raising her children on her own during the war and had to be away from them weekly until Clifton was 10 years old. Clifton says at first his mother did not recognize his father upon his return, but when she did, they had a happy reunion. His brothers and sisters began to marry and leave home during this time, and they lived in this home for several years. They moved to Beefide for a while, with only Clifton and his two younger sisters still at home. Then John bought a place on Owl Branch and built a cabin on it. Branham describes it as, quote, where the base was partially laid and the chimney was up to the mantel. When Father and I moved in, there was not a, and this is too dim to make out the words, and I was now 12 years old and fond of a gun. We would work all week until Saturday afternoon when my father and I squirrel hunted and my little feet would roam the mountains in search of game, never thinking that anything would ever befall me, nor did I ever think of harming anyone, unquote. Clifton leaves home. After helping build the house, Clifton said that he felt that his father was not being very fair to him. He left home and went to Johnson County, Kentucky, to live with a brother and two sisters. He had to travel 80 miles to get to his destination. The first day on the journey started out very well until evening came. Branham came to the first place to stay the night. The people refused to let him stay. By the time he got to the second place to ask for a place to stay, it was almost dark and it was raining. When Clifton asked the man if he could stay the night, he slammed the door on him and made no further answer. In the dark, Branham states that he finally made his way to a barn and spent the night in a loft. He talks about how it had been raining all night and into the morning when he starts out on his journey again. The banks of the creek had flooded at that point. He went across the creek between two poles when he fell into a hole that he could not reach the bottom of. He grabbed one of the poles to help him cross the water. When he reached the other side, it began to snow. Cold and wet, Clifton continued onward in his journey. He came to another house in which the young man asked him to come in and warm up by the fire. They were eating breakfast and asked Branham if he wanted a plate. He told them that he had no money to give them, but the man of the house said that it would not matter. So Clifton ate breakfast while warming up by the fireplace. After Clifton had dried out, the man showed him the best route to go to his destination. By the end of the day, Clifton had reached his brother's house. He then began working for himself and lived there for 4 years. Clifton Meets Nan. While Clifton was away, John Branham bought a piece of land on top of Cumberland Mountain and built a house there. Branham talks about how he had some kinfolk that lived on the south side of the Pound River and decided that he would go pay them a visit. When he was just 16 years old, he went to his cousin Martin Branham's home place to stay for a time. While he was there, he knew that Tandy Branham's family lived nearby. Tandy had been killed during the Civil War, and he left behind his widow and 7 children. There were 3 children still left in the home because the rest had married and moved away. While visiting with Martin, he met Nancy and thought that she was the prettiest girl in the world. They were only a month apart in age. Right then and there, Clifton was determined to marry Nancy no matter what. It seemed that both Nancy and Clifton were both struck by Cupid's arrow, and that they felt the same way about each other. However, her mother, Martha Elizabeth Robertson Branham, and her brother Wilburn refused the match and forbade the two from speaking to each other. This was because there was a well-to-do farmer by the name of Mullins from Dickinson County that Nancy had been talking to. Martha wanted Nancy to marry him as her chances for a better life with him would have been improved. However, Clifton and Nancy had talked to each other on the sly behind their back. Martha hired Clifton as a hired hand around her place for a month. She did so because he was a good worker, and Clifton agreed because he wanted to be around Nancy. As it turns out, Martha was often absent from the home, and Nancy was left with Clifton unsupervised on the farm. Nancy would call him to dinner about 11 o'clock, and they would spend 2 hours happily chatting away. Then Clifton would go back to work on the farm. During this time, Nancy told Clifton that she would agree to be his wife. Clifton and Nan Elope. With marriage to Nan in his mind, Clifton asked Martha if she objected to their union. She stated that she did not want them to marry because he was so young and might be mean to her, as Clifton had an ill temper. She was afraid that he would end up killing her daughter in a fit of rage. Clifton promised that he would never be mean to Nan, but this did not sway Martha, as she said that even though he was a good worker, he was too hot-headed for her daughter and refused to budge. She also warned Clifton not to put it into his mind to steal Nan away, for if he did, it would be better if a millstone hanged around his neck and cast into the sea. Clifton said that she would be his wife or he would die. The next day Martha had to leave again, but she left Floyd Branham's wife in charge of Nan. She was Nancy's sister-in-law. Later in that day, she left the house as it was getting late. This left Nancy and Clifton alone in the house. Nancy said, quote, "Clifton, this is as good a time for us leaving as it will get," unquote. He agreed. Just as they started to leave, Clifton saw his father, John, walking down the road toward them. Clifton waved him on down the road. John walked a short distance and saw Martha and stopped her. Nancy and Clifton ran through the orchard and to their freedom. They crossed the river at Martin Branham's home and then on to James Peake's home to stay the night. Clifton states that he had felt like that he had captured the world, and he thought that Nancy was pure and a perfect girl. The next morning they went on toward the top of Cumberland Mountain and stopped at the house of Clifton's sister, who lived 1/2 mile from John. His younger sister wanted the couple to go with her to John's home. At first, Clifton refused this invitation on account of he was afraid that John would be mad at him for stealing away with Nancy. But John came to the sisters' home and told Clifton that it was not the case and all was well. So they went on to John's house and stayed there for some time. Nancy's younger brother, who was also named John, came to the house bringing the rest of Nancy's belongings and giving them a message from Martha. Martha told them that she was still not giving up on Nancy and that she would not give her consent for marriage. Clifton sent back a message to her telling her that all was all right because he had Nanny, and it was no use acting foolish. The couple stayed at John Branham's farm for the next couple of months. Martha then sent for the couple. Nan and Clifton went to Mr. Austin's house on the river and asked him to make sure that everything was okay. Mr. Austin returned after he made sure that peace had been made with Martha. Clifton then went to Wise County Courthouse in Wise, Virginia, and got the marriage license. He then came back and married Nan. They returned to John's house. Married life. Clifton speaks about this time with Nan as being the happiest on this earth. When he would leave for work and return, she would always greet him with kisses. Within a year, their first child was born. The couple moved twice by the time their baby had reached a year of age. They went to Johnson County, Kentucky to visit Clifton's sister, where they stayed until that spring. They took a boat on the Big Sandy River to Pikeville, where Clifton found a job with a man named Ford. After working for him for a time, the couple moved to La Vista Fork of the Big Sandy River and worked for Jeff Rowe. During that time, the couple had another baby. Then they moved to Shelby Creek and back to the Cumberland Mountain. They lived happily together for 8 years and had 4 children, one of whom was a little girl that died at the age of 3. Clifton speaks that he was a tough boy even though the Lord had been knocking at his heart. Nan belonged to the church. He laments that if he had been as good as his wife, then his life would have been far different. Conclusion. We will leave Clifton and Nan and their marriage for now. We can surmise at this point in the story that something had happened to the marriage of Clifton and Nan. The death of a child is extremely hard on parents, and it looks as if after the death of Mima that the happiness that the couple shared died along with their daughter. From this point onward, Clifton's personality changes, as he will soon turn to moonshining and a life of crime. By the way his memoir is written, he no longer stays at the same home with his wife, and later they have a fight that will lead to Nan's death over a daughter. It is really unclear if it is Mima that Nan is speaking of or Ida, but we will get to that part of his memoir in part 3. We will see Nan and Clifton reconcile for a few months before the death of Henry Vanover, but after this point, their marriage has come to the point that it is now at an end. Thank you. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.